a question. What about the spies among us? What about the spies that are there, deeply embedded within even, dare I say, the president's inner circle? I wonder, because when I go back to this whole SignalGate thing, I keep coming back to the same conclusion. I think this was a setup. I think that there's no way that he just somehow miraculously put in a very liberal reporter by the name of Jeffrey Goldberg, who works at The Atlantic, into his phone. I think Mike Waltz actually would not have done that. Apparently, he was listed as somebody else in his phone. Like, the whole thing makes totally no sense. And so I think Donald Trump's looking at it and he's like, okay, yeah, no, this really doesn't make sense. And he trusts John Radcliffe and he trusts Mike Waltz and Pete Hegseth, et cetera, and Tulsi. So he's like, how could this have happened? Is there some kind of security flaw? After all, it was Biden's CIA that said, here you go for it. Signal's secure, go ahead and use it. By the way, you know who's on the board of Signal? 6 degrees of separation. That would be one Catherine Maher, who's head of NPR, which, you know, uses all that sort of, how do I say, USAID money that gets sort of washed and filtered through and then winds up helping to program. That's a whole other story on the the kind of money laundering that they seem to be doing with these NPR stations, because, yeah, your taxpayers' dollars do go towards it. Anyway, Timothy Haw got completely canned there on what was that, Friday, Thursday night at like 11 o'clock. And the news cycle's fast, right? You got to keep up, baby. You got to keep up. He's out. He was in charge of Cyber Command, and everybody's like, "Oh, it's because of Laura Loomer, this conservative reporter that I know." And I'm like, "Really? Is that all it is?" I mean, hey, you know, more power to her, but I don't think that's it. I think they may be using her as the fall guy, but Donald Trump is looking around and he's saying, hey, wait a second. The head of the NSA actually controls all these communications. The head of the NSA could certainly get into one's phone, like Michael Waltz's, change contacts. This is conjecture, by the way. I have no inside knowledge on this. I'm just saying, and this is likely what's going through his head. And then you couple that together with, some of Laura's reporting, which would suggest that maybe he's not as agnostic as you'd think. And I think Donald Trump is left with the conclusion, hey, I need to really make sure I have my own people, my own team here. And so that's what went down. Here's Laura Loomer's tweet. NSA Director Tim Haw and his deputy Wendy Noble have been disloyal to President Trump, and that is why they have been fired. So she feels, and she may have communicated this lack of loyalty. But again, it goes back to one thing. Donald Trump's looking around saying, how did this happen to Mike Waltz when we're supposed to have the best cybersecurity around? Can I trust my own peeps here? Can I trust who's actually running the security op? Given what Mike is saying, listen to him here on Fox News with Laura Ingraham.
Know what staffer is responsible for this right now?
Well, look, a staffer wasn't responsible, and look, I take full responsibility. I built the group. My job is to make sure everything's coordinated.
But how did the
execute
number? I mean, I don't mean to be pedantic here, but how did the number?
Have you ever had somebody's contact that shows their name, and then you have somebody else's number there?
I never make those mistakes.
Right? You got somebody else's number on someone else's contact. So of course I didn't see this loser in the group. It looked like someone else. Now, whether he did it deliberately or it happened in some other technical mean is something we're trying to figure out.
So your staffer did not put his contact information.
No,
but how did it end up in your phone?
Well, that's what we're trying to figure out.
Okay, but that's a pretty big problem.
That's what we've got the best technical minds, right?
That's disturbing.
And that's where, I mean, I'm sure everybody out there has had a contact where it was said one person and then a different phone number.
But you've never talked to him before, so how's the number on your phone? I mean, I'm not an expert in any of this, but it's just curious. How's the number on your phone?
Well, if you have somebody else's contact and then somehow it gets sucked in.
Someone sent you that
it gets sucked in.
Was there someone else supposed to be on the chat that wasn't on the chat that you thought was on the chat?
So the person that I thought was on there was never on there. It was this
Who
guy.
Was that? What person?
Well, I'm not. Look, okay. Laura, I take responsibility. I built the group.
Okay.
So but look, that's the part that we have to figure out, and that's the part that embarrassing, yes, but Pete and I are veterans. We know these operations. He has been an excellent Secretary of Defense, and this was an operation that, I mean, it amazes me. I guess the Democrats were fine to leave all the sea lanes shut down. We're fine to have destroyers fired on dozens of times by this terrorist group, and fine to have Iran keep supplying them missiles. That was okay. The president takes decisive action. And now we're seeing some real success in taking down their air defenses, opening the sea lanes, taking out their leadership. We don't want to talk about that. We want to talk about this.
Now,
Right. I mean, it was a very, very successful mission. So how did it get derailed with all of this? Now, some people are saying, well, what the heck are they doing on Signal to begin with? You know, they shouldn't have been going back and forth on Signal like this. Keep in mind, and John Radcliffe said this in the hearings, it was Biden, the CIA, that said, here you go, here's Signal. You can use this pretty freely. So that just gives me a little bit of pause. I'm like, oh, okay, really? And so getting back to what may have given the president pause, as Laura had pointed out, maybe his NSA was not as agnostic or, apolitical as the NSA probably should be. I don't know. Maybe this guy was fantastic. However, given the level of, dare I say, paranoia, given what went down, you can understand how some of her comments are resonating. She wrote, as a Biden appointee, General Howe had no place serving in the Trump administration, given the fact that he was handpicked by General Milley, who was accused of committing treason by President Trump. In other words, General Milley and President Trump, they got a bit of a history. Okay, so this is General Milley's guy, and her point is, understandably, maybe you don't want General Milley's guy. If nothing else, you want to be able to sleep at night, for goodness sakes. And, you don't have to sleep with one eye open. So General Milley's guy gets in there, and she's saying, why would we want an NSA director who was referred to Biden after being hand-selected by Milley, who told China, remember Milley, that he would side with them over Trump? The vetters should have been more critical, given the fact that the Pentagon revoked the security detail and clearance for retired General Mark Milley, who called President Trump a fascist. Why would we want Milley's handpicked choice for the NSA director? Very good question. Well, she said, we don't. And he was referred for firing. Given the fact that the NSA is arguably the most powerful intel agency in the world, we cannot allow for a Biden nominee to hold that position. So again, the NSA would tell you, okay, well, he's completely, you don't have to worry, like he's a military professional, he's not political. But in light of what just went down with SignalGate, yeah, everybody's like, well, isn't he going to fire someone? Isn't he going to fire Pete Hegseth? Isn't he going to fire Mike Waltz? Isn't he going to fire John Radcliffe or Tulsi or somebody? And he's like, oh, I'm going to fire somebody. But it's not going to be one of my people. It's actually going to be the head of the NSA, as well as several people over at NSC. And it is my understanding that there are more that are on the way. As for Wendy Noble, this was the second in command. She's pointing out that, look, this woman's a protege of James Clapper. Again, not exactly friendly territory, right? I mean, Clapper, basically was very much at odds with Donald Trump. And Donald Trump has called him a whole bunch of names. So to her point, why do you want Clapper's protege there as second in command at the NSA? I mean, this is actually sort of basic stuff. And wasn't Howard Lutnick in charge of the transition team? The guy who's like Mr. Tariff right now, who kind of freaked everybody out, and then some because of his math. Apparently he and Peter Navarro are struggling with 9th grade algebra. We'll get to that in a second. But, you got to wonder, who's vetting? Who's doing the vetting? Good points here from Laura.
I just think that there needs to be more appreciation demonstrated to Trump loyalists because unfortunately, we do see a lot of gatekeeping in the GOP. And the thing that I harped on the most during the campaign season was, the importance of vetting. We need to vet people so that we don't have the same nightmare that we saw happen in the first administration, where people who are disloyal to President Trump curry favor once the election's over after, shit talking him the entire election season.
And therefore get promoted, even though they didn't like him during the election season. So what kind of problem do you have? I think you got a problem. I think Laura's absolutely right. I don't know what kind of vetting went down. Again, Howard was supposed to be in charge of this, but apparently he was more interested in becoming Treasury Secretary himself. That all didn't pan out. And so we have a whole bunch of people there that I would just say the NSA, I don't disagree with her on this one. In light of the sort of peculiar animosity that is so heavily directed at one Donald Trump. You need to vet everyone, and you need to make sure that the inner circle is secure. And I'm not so sure it is. You know why? You know why? You know what happened last week on Wednesday before Donald Trump went to the Rose Garden to announce his tariff plan? Well, a couple things. In addition to some of the math being flawed, we'll get to that, which just tells me the people running the show, he shouldn't have to be sitting there doing math equations for them, for goodness sakes. But what concerns me is that there was news that Elon was stepping out. And this got leaked just hours ahead of the tariff news coming out. Don't forget, Elon has actually been more pro-free trade. He wants to clamp down on China, but not in the same way that, say, a Peter Navarro would. Peter Navarro, who used to be a UC Berkeley economist, and I used to put on television, I can remember back in my CNBC days, against Steve Moore for Fireworks Friday, because you could have the commie versus the capitalist, and that made for exciting TV. But now Peter Navarro's running this whole op. Okay, so just think about that. Just think about that for a second. Nothing against Peter. I mean, he was willing to go to jail. He didn't need to go to jail, but he was willing to go to jail for the president, etc. He could have just testified. Apparently, he chose not to. Wound up in jail, which actually just in some ways, might allude to some guidance issues. I don't know. We'll leave that aside for just a moment. First, think about Elon. Elon, who has put tons of money into this, who is aggressively working and taking on the system in a massive way with Doge, etc. He gets told by the media, by Politico, by Bloomberg, and by the Daily Mail that he's out, literally within 20 minutes of this cabinet meeting ending. I don't know quite how that happens. If you're told in a cabinet meeting, I get some confidential information that Elon's going to be eventually leaving, and suddenly it makes headlines, I find that really peculiar. I think you get somebody within the system that's leaking like a sieve, and that's where your issue is. By the way, this shouldn't come as a shock because, Elon only said he was going to be there 130 days to begin with. Here he is.
If that passes, our goal is to reduce the waste and fraud by $4 billion a day, every day, 7 days a week. And so far, we are succeeding.
Yes, they are succeeding. That was not the one I wanted, but that's okay. He's working hard. What he also told Bret Baier in that interview on Fox News was that he would be departing. He would be departing in the end of May, because he was only going to be there 130 days. So again, I go back to why is it that all of a sudden, right before they roll this whole thing out in the Rose Garden, with the math that even they're admitting does not make sense, because they apparently confused. This is not Trump's fault. Believe me, he deserves better. This is my entire point. He deserves the best of the best. He should have had Doge in there checking the math. But those guys didn't want Doge because there's this weird little power battle going on of some sort. You need everybody on the same team, okay? All hands on deck right now. I'm sorry. So the math that a 9th grade algebra student could do was proven wrong by AEI, the American Enterprise Institute, which looked at the formula, and the formula was basically off ChatGPT, and they found that they confused wholesale prices with retail prices. And by doing so, they actually inflated all the tariffs by times 4. So, hey, it gives you a starting point, shall we say, and you've heard Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, say, we're just negotiating, this is a negotiation standpoint, this is as bad as it can get. But did it really need to be that? Can't we just make sure that we have the right mathematicians in place so that we don't totally freak out the market?